Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Solidarity, a dialogue and screening session. I'm Melanie, your host and moderator for today. We're thrilled to have you all here today as we explore stories on women and how storytelling can be used to inspire change and gather support for women. So let's get started by introducing our guests first, starting with Zaharah.
Hi, I'm Zaharah, founding member and also the Executive Director of Casa Raudha.
I'm Alicia, I'm the Director of Women in Love.
I'm Nuryn, I'm the Director of In Your Absence.
So we'll start with the first question. Can you share with us what your definition of vulnerable women in Singapore?
I think that in general, all women are vulnerable in the many different ways. It can be financially, it can be security, even in social situations, a lot of women tend to be vulnerable. Even if you are married or not married, that kind of leads you to some kind of vulnerabilities as well. Yeah, so I think it's a pretty, when you think about it actually, a lot of women are constantly vulnerable in their places and even at work also.
I agree with what Nuryn said. In terms of vulnerable women, in my definition, it's this group of women who face increased challenges in terms of like socio-economic status. People like women with disability suffers from mental or physical health. I also agree that everyone at one part in their life, we're all in a certain part of their lives we experience we have vulnerable points.
I work with a lot of vulnerable women, but I agree with them. Vulnerability is not just at what age, what level, right? Even from young, girls are really vulnerable to so many things, whether it's on the basic needs that is not there for them, or just the basic needs alone for children, and then as they grow older, they continue to be vulnerable in many areas. So I agree with them. Women at different age, different level, they experience vulnerability at different environment altogether.
Thank you for your answer. So lately, society has actually painted a very specific ideal for empowered women. They often see empowered women as someone who is a trailblazer or like a working mother who can juggle their career well. So how do you think such ideals have sort of impacted women in general?
I think for me, a lot of us don't really set out to be trailblazers. I think a lot of the times we are kind of forced into a position where we have to be strong or stronger in that sense, especially for single mothers or even women who have disabilities like physical or mental, and then suddenly they become the advocate or they become the face of that movement in that sense. Yeah, but it can have both a positive and a negative connotation to it, I feel, because then it kind of leads to the question of, for other women who are kind of just existing, does it mean that they have to also be that kind of change or, that kind of face and front, But sometimes I think a lot of us just kind of want to just exist. A lot of the times we forget that it's okay to just be.
Personally, I feel it's actually quite toxic to brand empowered women as like these trailblazers, like these strong business women, because most of the time we see like how they are like in front of their social media, like they're very happy and everything, but we don't know what is going through behind closed doors. So it's actually pretty toxic to have that kind of labeling empowered women on this certain group of people. Yeah, because we all go through different things, and then when people look up to all these empowered women, and then they feel oh shit, I cannot live up to that kind of standards, and then I can't even match equally. Am I enough as a woman? So I feel it's a bit toxic to have that kind of labeling empowerment to this certain group of people.
So all women should be empowered.
Yeah, should feel empowered themselves, but not because of by a certain standards that I have to be a successful businesswoman to be considered empowered.
I do agree with that. I think sometimes we thought by using the word empowered woman would empower a lot of people, but I agree with what you said totally. Even a housewife can be an empowered woman, isn't it? She do not need to hold certain titles in the office. She can just be a housemaker. but how the children look at her, how she managed the house, how she managed the children growing up, managed a lot of things. Well, women wear many hats, right? How they manage caregiving for the elder people, elder parents, and they are empowered. So I do agree. Sometimes labeling does cause other women to feel that, am I good enough to be like that? And then start comparing, right? But worse still, if the boyfriend or the husband start to compare, why can't you be empowered like this? Why can't you be independent like this, right? But she is independent on her own. It's just that when we stop labeling, then we start to recognize the strength.
I feel like it's also the question of why we need to be empowered. Why do we have to have that label? You don't hear empowerment, you just hear men existing and doing what they need to do. Yeah, I think, like you said, we have to wear many hats. Why is it that a single working housewife can be empowered, but a woman who is, I would say, traditional marriage with kids and all that, who's a homemaker, why can't she also feel empowered? But also, why do we need to feel empowered? I'm very tired.
Thank you for your answers. Let's talk about our first short film, Woman in Love. So Alicia, what is your inspiration behind that short film?
It's actually because I worked previously with Singapore Prison Service. I didn't actually film in the women faculty. So, but then because I had a close relationship with the inspector, so I always wondered how is the female inmates because not being able to being in that faculty. So she shared a bit more how is it like. So she did mention and share that because a lot of times all these women, they've been through the system, so they feel like they've really hit the lowest point. So what else is there for them, right? Because they can just go through the system because they've already been through the worst. Yeah, so to me, my short film, after hearing that, it's actually quite sad, all these women, they go through all this cycle and then keep going through it because they feel like they've really hit rock bottom. So my short film is just a platform for them to let them know that there is a support system out there. They just need to reach out. There is always hope.
For Zaharah, when it comes to women in this kind of relationships, do you believe that they are stuck in a cycle? And how can they then break out of the cycle?
Being stuck in a toxic relationship, it really depends. It really about how the woman is, right, as a person. Whether most of the women that we met, why they continue to keep stuck in such relationship, because of the lack of the family support, right? Just now when you mentioned they feel that they are at the lowest end, right? Why do they have to feel that like that, right? Just because they went to prison, just because they did something wrong. But it's the same feeling, right, that the woman that resides in the crisis shelter, because of the abusive relationship, also feeling the same. They felt they're at the lowest end, right? They felt stuck in this relationship. So sometimes we look at why they are like that. Yeah, so do we ask, right? What happened to the self-esteem of this woman? Who crushed it? At what age it has been crushed? Or even, tell them that they are not good enough, right? So as we talk to some of the women, right, who experience this kind of toxic relationship, you may find that many often what they witness growing up, right, what they hear, what they witness growing up, and who their circle of friends does play a part in who they think they are, right? Because I believe every woman, they are born with certain kind of identity, certain kind of strength. Not only women, people, human in general, right? But that has been reshaped by how we grow up, the environment that we grew up with. So when we talk about women staying in a toxic relationship, it's always about their self-esteem. It's always about us asking themselves, am I good enough to get a better person than this? What happens if I leave this person? Who will love me then? Right? It's always about wanting to be loved, but looking at the wrong person or wrong place to find that genuine love, so called. Right? So so it's always have to do something with the self-esteem of the person.
How can they then break out of this cycle? What would help them?
They need to start believing in themselves. They need not start to compare. Is this woman better than me? Is this woman look prettier than me or richer than me? They need to start compare and really need to look at inside. What is their real strength? What is it that they have and carry that forward? Right? Because all along, the women that we work with, right, we always give them opportunity for them to excel, for them to showcase what they are good at. Sometimes their talent, their potential is there. It's just that it is hidden somewhere, right? So they need to come out from that. They need to start loving themselves first before they could say, I want you to love me. They need to say, I love myself first and I respect myself.
I agree with what she said because like, there's this thing where my mom also said before where like she can keep scolding me, she can keep nagging, but like I will not change unless I truly want to change myself. So I agree with what she said about wanting to change and then like believing in that change myself first to make that change. So yeah, but all these women, I guess they just need also to know that there are like these support systems out there so they can reach out when they choose to make that change. Because a lot of times like everyone goes through like toxic relationships, not just like in a girl-boy relationship, like not just women, right? When they go through all these like toxic relationships themselves, they feel like, okay, like only me can, and like I'm the only one who can understand what I'm going through right now. Nobody else can understand. I can share with my best friend, I can share with my mother, but they are not in my shoes, so they will never understand what I'm going through. So just that alone, they will feel very alone and like very lonely, and they refuse to like, maybe take in like help. So they have to make that first step to make the change themselves.
Nuryn, for you, when you were filming in your absence, was it a deliberate attempt to examine it as a cycle across 2 generations?
I would say kind of yes and no. When I originally wrote the script, it really was to kind of focus on the sexual harassment that Zaharah faced at work. And then I kind of wanted to go a bit deeper and try to really understand and sort of build her character and how she reacts to the harassment faced at work. And then that kind of introduced that layer of, actually when she was younger, she also had faced this similar situation. And then and also in kind of looking at different films that also talked about sexual harassment at work. One of the films that stood out to me was this short film called Double Speak, where she was sexually harassed at work, and then immediately after she had a phone call with her mom and tries to act as if everything is normal. So that kind of had a similar play out in my film as well. And then I wanted to again explore, why does she react the way she reacts, and why is it that she doesn't actually tell her mom the real reason that she's calling. And then in that it also introduced, while we never actually see the mom, you get a sense of really who or what kind of mother she was in her past. And at the same time you get a sense of Zaharah's upbringing while not actually showing it. So I would say it was a deliberate attempt to kind of explore toxic cycle, like repeated toxic cycles, and at the same time a mother-daughter relationship, and kind of the effect that it has on one's upbringing, which I think is important in any kind of world building or character building, I feel, because in short films you only have that little time to kind of introduce your characters and the story. So while it may seem a bit like touch and go-y, I feel that it's quite important to have like certain themes come up, because you realize that kind of everything is interlinked to each other.
Zaharah, since you've worked with women who has faced like situations where they've been abused, I'm also curious to know, like, how do you think generational trauma has placed women in this kind of vulnerable situation?
I think what she said is very true, and bringing intergenerational abuse is important because, like what I mentioned, children, they grow up witnessing. Yes, children, they are like sponge, right? Whatever, sponge, when you pour water, just absorb, continue to absorb, right? So most of the children, when they grow up, they are like that. And who best to showcase or to model the behavior, right, whether positive or negative, would be their parents. That would be the first people that they witness. They want to copycat the parents' behavior, things like that. So growing up, when they witness anything that is imbalanced, in the household, right? They tend to try it out because that's how they learn. They do not know any other norm ways because they are exposed to that kind of environment. So when we talk about intergenerational abuse, naturally, when they experience growing up like that, it will more or less bring it on with them. They will tend to follow through what they've seen, what they learn, what they hear, right? But so having said that also, there are women who have experience growing up facing that, but they manage to break free from the generational abuse. This is where when they equip themselves with knowledge, education, right? And different kind of environment that they choose to want to belong. Then they may be able to break that kind of intergenerational.
I think it's very difficult to break out.
On her own maybe, but if she have the right support, just now you talk about resources out there, there's a lot of resources. If you can't find the resources that you're looking for within your family members, there's always one outside, right? And I think in Singapore, there's a lot of resources, community resources that have been planted there to support individual and families in order to be someone who can overcome challenges.
Let's move on to another topic which has also been touched on quite a bit in the film, sexual harassment at work. So actually a study in 2021 showed that only 1 in 3 people who has encountered sexual harassment at work reported it. So why do you think they are hesitant to report, such harassment cases?
I think there's a lot of reasons and stigma surrounding even reporting a sexual harassment. Yeah, I think first of all, it's a very grey area also, like defining what sexual harassment is, and then like sometimes it could just be a genuine accidental brush or like somebody touches your shoulder and anything and you don't really think about it at first. But then once it gets like, it becomes like a repeated thing, then that's when you start to realize that, oh, maybe this might be, something else lah. It might be sexual harassment. And then at that point in time, you don't know whether or not to bring it up. Yeah, for one thing. And then it's also the whole idea of keeping the status quo. And like, when everybody has the impression of this one person and then you encounter that negative experience with them, it's the immediate reaction is always, no lah, he won't do that kind of thing, or he's a nice person or whatever. So then it makes you kind of think to yourself again lah, whether or not this thing actually happened or not, and then you gaslight yourself into thinking that it's not a big deal. Keeping the status quo and like, even if you report it, what's next, what are like higher ups gonna do about it? And most of the time people they'll just easily close a blind eye to it lah, because it's not like a rape. They don't see it as a serious issue lah. Yeah. And then that comes down to really, what are we teaching men and boys, Why are we not saying that, this is not okay in any kind of situation also? It's not just like a male touching a female. It can be also male touching male or female touching female. It's all about like personal space and understanding personal boundaries lah. It's a very weird dynamic, I would say also, because it's on the one hand, it's like, if you report it, then everybody knows that you are that kind of, like, it could be that some people will have the idea that you have an agenda against this one person. Or if you do report it, then it comes back to you and it's like, oh, you think you so like hot stuff like that, that people are interested in you, that kind of thing. And then that it's just a whole kind of mess of things lah. And I also cannot imagine like what these women who do experience this go through, because a lot of the times they are just left silent, and then some of them actually have to leave their jobs, and then it gets hard for them to continue on with their career. And then it's like, you want to be empowered woman, but these are the things that are taking that power away from you.
Zaharah, what do you think can be done then to alleviate all of these concerns or situations, so that women, or actually anyone, are not afraid to come out and say that I have been sexually harassed at work.
It's important for victims of sexual harassment, whether you are male or female, to have a voice, and that voice cannot be heard if the environment or the workplace environment is not aware, or there's no awareness or no SOP even, right? When there's sexual harassment, what would be the SOP to report? Because when employee know that there is an existing SOP, then the employee, upon admission or upon recruitment, right, when you do your onboarding, that kind of, so when they know that, okay, this organization have this kind of SOP, which means it is safe for the employee to step forward, right? If there is none, then that's the gray area. That's the part where they said, if I do this, how do I do it, right? Who do I talk to? Because sexual harassment is very sensitive, and worse if the organization does not practice that kind of support, right, for employee to come up and speak up, and how to contain the confidentiality of the reporting as well, right? Because it can be very, such topic can be seen as, oh, this is something juicy to talk about in the office environment. So if there is no safeguarding of such matter being reported, and how the person privacy or the person reporting will be protected, there is a tendency of all this will happen, all this talk behind will happen. And that's also one of the things why the employee didn't want to report, because then there will be talk among their colleagues, talk among people, how they, because every of your colleague, they have different mindset. Some, like what you say, the victim blaming, right? Sometimes they just feel, if I speak up, then people start talking about it, and what if the one that causing this is someone in the group, right? Who will my colleague choose? Will they choose him, or they will her, or they will choose me to side, right? Then very soon they feel that they're all alone in the organization, and that is where sometimes they resort to, let's just leave the organization, right? So what's important is for every organization to have this kind of awareness, create the awareness among all employees, and also to tell them that any form of harassment or sexual abuse is not to be tolerated, regardless who you are or what level you hold, right? Or even sometimes it's not just a top level who does that to the senior, to the junior, but sometimes among your own common colleague, you does that, right? So this is something that needs to have an open conversation with the colleague, right, with the employer and employee.
So the next question is directed to the two filmmakers here. So how do you think filmmakers can ensure that stories about vulnerable women are told in a respectful yet impactful manner?
Okay, as a filmmaker, of course, we have to ensure the accuracy, and then also to speak with this group of vulnerable women and communities to make sure that whatever they've been through, it's okay to go through it, and then to respect their feelings and let them know that it is okay. And then we showcase it in our film. We don't want to let them relieve their trauma, so we have to innovate the way we tell our story, our narratives, in terms of maybe visuals, like how we can avoid showing the whole sexual harassment on the visuals itself. Yeah, I think that's one way of being respectful. Yeah. As for being impactful, it is of course the way how we add in the hope, inspire change, at the end of the film or wherever possible. Yeah. So at least the viewers, when they watch the film, they know that okay, there is hope out there. After watching it, they feel okay, I know with the information there, I can have I can reach out to these organizations for help and support if I don't get it from my family, or just to instill some little empowerment in them by adding all these little things in the film.
Yeah, I agree with what Alicia said. I think for us, because we are women filmmakers, we kind of have a bit more empathy and understanding about telling these kind of stories that may be, a bit sensitive or a bit, what do you call it? a bit triggering for some people lah. In any case, not just sexual harassment, like any kind of abuse that even we ourselves might have gone through or somebody that we might know go through. The base of it is just the intention of what you're trying to say in your film. Yeah, and like really doing your research, you know, trying to be as truthful as possible in, like she said, while also still keeping that creative integrity lah. I guess for my film itself also, we never really showed the sexual harassment of it because it was a deliberate attempt lah also, because I don't feel that it is a need to portray the scene, you know, if it's implied through music, through visuals, through sound especially. I don't think that you actually need to have a scene where you show the actual abuse happening on set itself, on set etiquette. Even when doing these scenes, it's important that the crew has an understanding of like what's going to happen and, you know, being respectful of like the actors themselves, you know. And it's like really talking to everybody, make sure that they themselves are comfortable to play out the scene, you know, even though it's not real in that sense. Sometimes it could be triggering for some actors or even some crew members, yeah. And then in Singapore, it's not really practiced, but they do have kind of intimacy trainers. Yeah, there's one intimacy trainer I know in Singapore, but she mostly does for theatre. Yeah, but she actually taught me for a while, and then I got to kind of have a better understanding of, you know, how people actually shoot intimacy scenes, you know, that even every kind of movement, or if there's like a kiss scene or a hug scene, basically any kind of touching scene, even if it's girl, guy, or girl, guy kind of thing, you know, it's still being directed by the intimacy trainer also. So at least everybody knows kind of what's going on and what to expect. And then it's, if the actor's not okay with it, then, you know, you can always try to change it a little bit. Or yeah, so that kind of awareness for us in production especially, there's usually more male crews than female crews. Yeah, so it is what it is, but you know, if we, as much as we can, try to make it a safe environment for everybody, because at the end of the day, filmmaking also it's a passion for most, but it's a job for others as well. So if we, at the end of the day, we can come home from work safe and sound, and, you know, but still create, you know, good, impactful films, then yeah.
We've come to the last question of this dialogue. How can the various pillars within communities best support vulnerable women in Singapore?
You know, there's 48 family service centres in Singapore. Yeah, and it's all over Singapore. So you can just click on the FSC's locator, right? Then we can tell you where they are. So that is more structured, right? More structured community service support. They are also still structured, but more defined on the service that the woman need. For example, if the woman experience abuse by the husband, but do not want to go to the FSC, but the woman feel that I have this religious teacher that I'm comfortable with. Can the religious teacher be part of my first touch point for me to share? They are also trained now about domestic violence. They're also trained how to handle cases like that. So women who are into, you know, who are more comfortable with the religious teacher can just go there to get support. And there's also, sometimes once a while I receive email, this group of women, they set up their own among friends, right? When they want to reach out to the other women in the shelter, how to make friends with them, how to be friends. These are all informal support group that should be encouraged, right? There should be more women coming forward to support another woman. You need not go through certain kind of licensing. There's a lot of work in that area. But if you feel strongly about wanting to support women in your own capacity, you know what you can do. You can just do it on your own, right? So these are less informal, but there are people out there who wants to support. These are the things that we say is important. The other one is, of course, when you on your own advocate, you know what is toxic relationship. I'm not just talking about abuse, right? There are also other part of toxic relationship. So if you are aware, you know, and and if you happen to know your friends or your family members who are experiencing it, then be that support person for this. Be that voice that tell the woman that, hey, look, you need to relook into this, you need to get support, I can be there for you. So this informal support is actually very strong and it's very empowering.
I think a lot of the times we actually forget to listen to women, and a lot of the times the cry for help is very masked. It comes off as in a lot of different ways. Yeah, I think it's about time that we try to be honest with ourselves and with each other about, you know, if we do need the help. Yeah.
I also think that having dialogue sessions like this, having like female like filmmakers, or like even having groups like this to share their thoughts and like maybe share their experiences, it helps getting the conversation going. Yeah, even campaigns, raising awareness, it shows and it shares that there are all this support in place for them to reach out to if they ever feel like they need someone to reach out to when they can't even get help.
This brings us to the end of our dialogue session. Thank you to the three ladies here for taking the time to come and share about your experiences and your stories. And thank you to all of you for being a part of this wonderful evening. All of us have a role to play in empowering women. Let us continue to use the power of storytelling to inspire social change.